What happened to Jason Todd? But more significantly, who is Jason Todd? For your enlightenment, Jason is one more iteration of Robin, Batman's trusted sidekick. At the beginning of the Dark Knight Returns saga, it is presumed that he has been dead for 10 years already. Back in 1986, when it was published, the writers and artists, the chief of which was Frank Miller, decided to start the series on the premise that this Jason fellow has died, and that fact is pivotal. The details of Jason Todd's death as the second-choice Robin are intentionally vague. Jason's death is also the reason Batman retired. Bruce Wayne is also no longer on speaking terms with his first Robin, Dick Grayson. Commissioner Gordon, who figured out Batman's secret identity long ago, knows all of this. However, did Batman's need for redemption as a failed father figure to Jason inspire his decision to come out of retirement? Interestingly, it's not long before he becomes that same father figure to Carrie Kelly, and eventually, the mutants. For clarity, the Dark Knight Returns series tells an alternative story of an older Bruce Wayne, in between retirement while still fighting against his old foes, as well as the Gotham City police force, and even the US government. It also culminates in a fight with Superman, who is now a pawn of the government. The writer and artist took over 30 years to fill in the story gaps with a proper prequel, subtitled The Last Crusade. It is the story of an aging Bruce Wayne going through an identity crisis. He is addicted to his life as Batman, but the aches and pains that come with being the protector of a city such as Gotham are starting to catch up with him. Bruce realizes that he will soon need to hang up the cape and cowl for good, but not until he has a successor. He wants to pass the torch to his sidekick, Jason Todd, aka Robin, but fears he isn't quite ready. Bruce's fears are realized as Robin's recklessness results in him dying. While this was only mentioned in passing in the original Dark Knight Returns, it was an incredibly traumatic experience for Bruce, ultimately leading to his retirement. What we didn't get in the original story, though, were his emotional and physical inner conflicts prior to Jason Todd's demise. Miller and Azzarello, credited as the creators, show us Bruce Wayne struggling to accept that he can't be Batman forever, no pun intended. The rate of his physical decline far outpaces Jason Todd's ascension towards becoming the next Dark Knight. In the meantime, Gotham's ugly criminal underbelly isn't waiting for them to steady the ship. The universe in which The Dark Knight Returns takes place is more abrasive than the traditional DCU. That being said, you can't help but like the interpretation of Jason Todd, a character already known for being the most reckless to take up Robin's mantle. Miller and Azzarello dialed the intensity up a notch with Jason, having him throw a batarang directly into a gunman's arm rather than simply knocking the weapon out of his hand. Bruce pointed out that his biggest flaw is that he lacks compassion, and the writers do an excellent job depicting this. There's also the scene where Jason slams a van door closed right onto a thug's head, resulting in a large pool of blood at the Boy Wonder's feet. While they don't outright say that the thug is dead, let's face it, he's dead. Also, some of the most prevalent members of Batman's rogues gallery are on full display in this book, as we get some awesome sequences with Killer Croc and Poison Ivy. Of course, everyone's favorite clown Prince of Crime is included. The typically manic and wild Joker is his usual self when he's being dragged to his cell in Arkham Asylum. Still, he takes on a much calmer demeanor throughout the rest of the story, inciting chaos around him with his mere presence alone. And it's especially eerily disturbing to see the serene look on his face while simultaneously watching Jason Todd get beaten to death in the final pages of this book. But let's backtrack to 1986, when Frank Miller and Klaus Janson crafted one of the most influential comic books of all time, Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. In the early pages of The Dark Knight Returns, the reader is introduced to a retired Bruce Wayne in his 50s, give or take a few years. The hero has been out of the fray for a decade, with the events surrounding his decision to hang up the cowl mostly left ambiguous. But then, in 2016, Miller returned to the world with the one-shot prequel Dark Knight Returns: The Last Crusade. So here are some ways the prequel connects to and fleshes out the original. In the prequel, Batman shows the physical toll that all his years of crime fighting have taken, and he is unable, or at least unwilling, to call it quits. His second protege and current Robin, Jason Todd, is not yet ready to take over the mantle of Batman. While Jason easily demonstrates the skill and aptitude required to operate independently, his increasing ruthlessness and cruelty give Bruce pause. And given the eventual fate of Dick Grayson, the former Robin in The Dark Knight Strikes Again, it's understandable Bruce is unwilling to give up control. The Last Crusade calls into question the relationship between Batman and Robin on several occasions, with the media pointing out the off-sided child endangerment concerns and discussing the psychological ramifications of using a child as a sidekick. Batman has raised Robin to be a soldier, but at what cost? Bruce asks himself this question as he weighs the possibility of relinquishing his cowl and is forced to consider that there may be a better way. And the true tragedy of The Last Crusade lies in this glimmer of hope and optimism. After all, the reader knows exactly what becomes of Jason Todd. His death is inevitable and is looming ever closer with each panel. In the final pages of the comic, Jason, unbeknownst to Bruce, attempts to take down the recently escaped Joker by himself, only to be caught and beaten by what appears to be the Joker's henchman. This moment is even more tragic by the juxtaposition of Bruce's conversation with Alfred. In it, he discusses the possibility of hanging up his cape, becoming a retired warrior philosopher, and teaching Jason how to be a better man. That statement has a lot of promise and hope, because Bruce truly believes he can redirect Jason's energy. And the inevitable happens in that instance of light in what had so far traditionally been a story characterized by darkness. And just as soon as it appears, this selfsame light is extinguished. Bruce receives the sad news that he has invariably lost another Robin, and he is now incapacitated without an heir to take up his one-person war on crime.